I guess first, thanks so much for taking time after the end of the semester to come to this. Oh, we have more coming in, as you called it, for this May faculty workshop. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that I did as a function of a CTRL small grant I got to look into experiential learning and co-curricular activities and the effects that they have on different kinds of learning outcomes, both at the course level and at the university level. I found through over the course of the project that I thought that the two types of outcomes were going to be a little bit more intertwined, but they were actually a bit separate, and it led to some interesting results and has some implications for what we can do with experiential learning and co-curriculars. But before I start, excuse me, let me give you a little bit of background on where I'm coming from. I'm reading this directly from the Wikipedia template, or the Wikipedia entry here. For those of you who haven't been at American since like it would have been 2016, and why Comet Ping Pong is so important for what it is I'm about to talk about. On December 4th, 2016, Edgar Madison Welsh, a 28-year-old man from Salisbury, North Carolina, arrived at Comet Ping Pong, which is in, I forget the name of the neighborhood, not Cleveland Heights, Cleveland Park, Cleveland Park, Van Ness, and fired 3 shots from the AR-15 style rifle that struck the restaurant's walls, a desk. Yeah, you're good. Yeah. Oh, the mic issue. Should I pause? No, keep going. Okay. That struck the restaurant's walls, a desk, and a door. Welch later told police that he planned to self-investigate a conspiracy theory that argued that there was a child sex trafficking ring going on in the basement of Comet Ping Pong. There's a couple problems with that conspiracy theory. Primarily, there is no basement, very much like the Alamo and Pee-wee's Big Adventure. So there was no way for there to be a child sex trafficking ring there. However, this was born from the overall QAnon conspiracy theory, which dated back a couple of years from there. He surrendered after officers surrounded the restaurant, and he was arrested without incident. Nobody was injured. Incidentally, Welch, the gentleman who fired a couple of shots into Comet Ping Pong, was killed earlier this year at a traffic stop. So given the proximity of Comet Ping Pong to the university and its salience for a course that I teach in the core, a course on disinformation and conspiracy theories, I take all of my students who are all freshmen, many of them new to the Washington, D.C. area, many of them with no idea about Welch or the QAnon conspiracy theory and how it came here. I take them all there for a pizza party for one of the co-curriculars. It's actually become pretty popular. I think this past year we had, I think, 45 students. The year before we had something like 71. So they get to socialize. The students get pizza, which is free to them, which is a treat for a broke freshman. And while at Comet Ping Pong, I give a brief lecture on the Pizzagate conspiracy theory and kind of how it relates to what we're talking about in the disinformation conspiracy theory class. So it's turned into a big a bit of a big event in that course, and the students seem to really enjoy it. Case in point, I asked one of my students informally, not on my SATs, throughout the course of the semester, I often ask them, so what do you like about the course? What do you dislike about the course? Because I've been teaching the course, I think, for 3 years now. 3 years? And to a T, it's always the pizza party in the middle. Although we did do a couple of extra experiential learning activities this year that were very beneficial as well. I took them to the Capitol for a tour of the Capitol as well. That went over pretty well too. But this is all to say that in my course, and from what I hear, what I have heard across the core, students love doing this kind of thing. They love getting out of the classroom. They love getting into DC, and they love learning about the things they're hearing about in class, but in kind of a hands-on kind of way. So in terms of the project background, and that picture there on that slide, that's myself on the left, leaning over awkwardly, along with my students from my disinformation and conspiracy theory class from this past fall. They were kind enough to give us a tour of the Capitol and show us some of the spots where that were of interest to for the January 6th insurrection attack, also based in large part on disinformation and conspiracy. But the background for this project was that I noticed that experiential learning and co-curriculars seem to be pretty popular among the students and among the faculty that I talked to, but all of my evidence was anecdotal. It all related to students saying how much fun they had, as I said, going into DC or elsewhere, quote, getting their hands dirty and actually learning about the things that they've been hearing about in class in a way that differs from a traditional way of learning. So last year, I submitted a proposal to CTRL to do a formal investigation, empirical investigation into experiential learning and co-curricular activities and how they relate to different kinds of outcomes, both at the course level and at the university level. And as we'll see later, to significant outcomes of interest to the university that I'm sure every faculty member has heard again and again and again. But before I get into the actual project itself, let me give you some background on experiential learning more generally. And there's a huge literature on this, there's a huge line of research on this in the education literature. But most of it kind of agrees that this out of classroom experience that students get, whether it is experiential learning or whether it's lab learning or whether it's having guest speakers, it seems to have positive outcomes for both the instructor and the students. In many ways, I kind of refer to as these experiential learning incidents as caffeine for the class, because it really does supercharge what they're doing. It brings it to life for them. And just to give you a couple of positive outcomes that have been identified in the literature. First of all, students remember information much easier if they actually see kind of the basis for the information you deliver in class. It allows for greater critical thinking and reasoning. It allows students to consider some of the arguments that you give in class a bit more deeply. It causes students to be more engaged in the material you're teaching, not just during the class where there's an experiential learning experience or a co-curricular, but also beyond that when it relates to the learning experience you gave the students. Very importantly, I thought here, especially for we call the COVID kids, the students who came through high school that we're now getting who were COVID students who essentially took a year and a half of school on Zoom and don't necessarily have the social skills they need for or aren't up to par as some of their peers, some of their older peers in terms of social skills for college. There's been recent research to show that these experiential learning activities, because it gives students a chance to socialize and get to know their cohort a bit more, it develops those soft skills in a way that they missed out during their COVID years. It also allows us to get outside the box of thinking that each student learns in a similar fashion. All students learn in different ways. And by putting the information or bringing it to life for students through these experiential activities, it allows students to engage with the information in a way that suits their learning style. And a word for anybody who's taught in the core that everybody will recognize, it allows students to engage in metacognition. Think about what they're thinking about. And in my class, as a bit of anecdotal evidence, my students have started thinking or have expressed that they started thinking more deeply about the kinds of information they encounter and whether or not it might be disinformation. So I do see that borne out in my class. Now, this is a good breakdown of kind of what the literature shows. I mean, there are decades of research on this kind of thing. But what about the uniqueness of the AU experience? What about AU experiential learning and co-curriculars? Because every learning environment is different. And what you might get out of an experiential learning activity at AU is going to be different than what you might get at the University of Minnesota, what you might get at UC Santa Barbara, what you might get at Texas Tech. So a lot of the experiential learning and the co-curriculars are based on the resources that we have, the location in DC that we have access to, the context in which the information is being taught. So, for example, teaching the disinformation and conspiracy class, the fact that we're in such a politically polarized and heightened context right now, it really drives some of the information home to them when they see kind of the source of this information, as well as the goals, the objectives, and the outcomes you're interested in for your specific class. So with these kind of themes in mind, I went forth and came up with a couple of research questions, very broad research questions, which I found as I started doing data collection and analysis that they really bore down to very specific kinds of topics. But those research questions specifically are number one, to what degree, if at all, because at this point I didn't have any evidence about AU, do experiential learning activities influence the outcomes that we're interested in, not just for us, but for our students as well? To what degree, if any, do co-curricular activities influence salient outcomes? And a research question that emerged later is to what degree can we distinguish co-curricular activities and experiential learning activities? Spoiler alert, for many faculty, the answer is no, we can't distinguish them. And finally, can experiential learning activities and co-curriculars contribute to larger university goals? And I'm talking about university goals here in the very macro sense. For anybody who's been in a faculty meeting for the last, I don't know, 2 years, you know that there's a lot of talk about university goals related to budget, a lot of university goals related to retention and recruitment to help sustain the university financially. And although it was not part of my original plan, it turned out that some of the outcomes that I looked at do speak to some of these goals. So despite being a generally speaking small scale study, I do think that what I looked at has implications for what the university does moving forward with some of these larger goals. Now, moving into the study itself. Well, first, let me stop. I do want to pause for questions if there are any questions so far before I jump into the study itself. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My understanding is we call co-curricular, especially in the core, because they have a cohort of different groups. So in my class, they group the classes together according to theme. So in my disinformation class, I'm often paired with other classes that look at political conflict, other things. So when I talk about co-curriculars, I'm talking about when the different cohorts come together and they come together for some kind of learning objective. Now, a lot of times that includes an experiential learning activity. So for Comet Ping Pong, I had my class and I invited the other cohort to come, or the rest of the cohort to come as well. And we got 70 students there, some of which I think weren't even in the cohort. They were there for free pizza, but all were welcome. But as I'll mention, after I polled the instructors, even the qualitative data I gathered, they were like, I don't know what you're talking about, what the difference is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Does somebody have another question or comment? And online, are you guys monitoring online? See if there's any questions in the chat or anything. I don't think there are yet. Okay, good. Okay, so let me jump into the actual study itself. Essentially, what I did, first and foremost, with the help of CTRL, Brad, I think you were a big help in this regard. I appreciate the extensive spreadsheet and came to hate it by the time I was done this project because of the number of cells I had to look at. But with Brad's help, I was able to identify courses with experiential learning activities and co-curricular activities, primarily through the core, because those have quite a few of those different kinds of classes. I forget exactly how many classes there were in there, but it was, when it was all said and done, I believe the number of sections, not classes, sections represented was 112. 112 sections of classes. I think the average number of students who responded per section was 3 or 4, but I'll get to that. Before I got to actually polling the students in the class to talk about their perspectives, I got every instructor of every section and sent them all an email saying, hey, how many co-curriculars and experiential activities do you have in your class? What did they like? What kinds of activities do you engage in? And would you be willing to chat with me later after this project is over? So there was a fantastic response to that. As I said, I think all told, not counting or including the classes or the sections where no students responded, not the fault of the instructor. I think there was close to 140 responses there from instructors. So that was fantastic. So that gave me baseline data for number one, how many activities outside the classroom or in a unorthodox fashion do students engage in over the course of a semester in this particular course. Now from there, I moved on to the students. Now this is where my burning white hot hatred of Excel went into overdrive. For a couple of reasons. Number one, out of all those sections, there were 2,200 students that I reached out to. And apropos of nothing with respect to this project, if you try to email 2,200 students, it will bounce back 2,200 emails. So I got 2,200 bounce back emails into my inbox because I put a link to the survey and it thinks you're a spam bot if it does that. So I went back, I identified the courses and sent them the 19 or 20 at a time. So students and courses were emailed together, different sections were emailed together, which meant I sent 112 different emails to these different sections to get responses. And in total, I ended up with 368 response from students, which was pretty good, I thought. It's not too bad. The actual response, the number of responses I had, I think was actually 420 or 430. But there were some students who clearly just kind of straight lined their responses. Some students who were less than 1/4 of the median time to respond, who they were just clicking through. There was one student who I guess left his computer on because he was like 362,000 seconds or something, and he must have left for the week or something. So getting rid of those, we ended up with 368. All of them. These are all the students over the course of all across the core. Yep. Different years. Yeah. And I'll have that breakdown in a bit. Yeah. And what schools they came from too. Yeah. I did the crosstabs. I don't have them in my results here, but I can send it to people. I was gonna try to have some fun and break down who's the most satisfied of all the students across school, but I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Average age 20.6. So we're averaging, I guess that would be between a sophomore or junior. Well, I guess like a junior would be 20.6. In terms of representation, kind of unsurprising because the cast is so represented in the core. They represented the majority of the students who responded, followed by SPA, SIS, COGOD, and SOC with School of Education, other kind of backing up. And then in terms of years, I was surprised by this because my experience in teaching is it's all freshmen who take the core, but that's my course itself. Before doing this project, I did not know that students of all parts of the university at all grades take it. So it was actually a pretty good distribution here of students who took this poll. So we have a good distribution here. In terms of the outcomes I was interested in. Now, as I said a couple of times, I had class-oriented outcomes and university-oriented outcomes. It sounds really smart that I did that, but that was by accident. I just had outcomes that kind of broke out into these two different groups because of the way the data kind of fell out. So over the course, let me go through the different class-oriented outcomes or section-oriented outcomes I was interested in. Number one, satisfaction. Essentially, these were all the class-oriented outcomes were semantic differentials where they could choose some point between a pair of words. Satisfaction was essentially how satisfied were you with the course? How happy were you with what you got out of the course? How content are you with the course? Things like that. Stimulation, how academically stimulated were you? How excited were you by the material? Things like that. That actually had a good high alpha as well. And then I added some questions about value. How much do you think this course or this class was worth your time? Because something that I often hear from students in classes, not just at AU, but in my teaching over the course of my career, you hear the famous, this class had no point, I hear from some of the classes that I've taught in the past, which really hurts my feelings. So I wanted to make sure that my students felt like they were getting value out of the course. And here, this semantic differential related to things like, did you think the course was valuable for the skill set you were trying to develop? Do you think this course prepared you for what you needed to do moving forward? Things of that nature. And finally, I actually considered this to be like a moderator almost, perceived workload. And it doesn't mean, was there too little work or was there too much work? It was the amount of work the right amount or was it the wrong amount? They didn't give me like it was too much or too little. The semantic differential was set up such that it could say the workload was good or the workload was bad, essentially. In terms of university-oriented outcomes, number one, and this was originally I think a 10-item scale that when I did a factor analysis of it, it broke out into two different factors. One, which I thought was pretty cool, that all the items were related to how connected students felt to the university itself. These were essentially Likert type scales on a scale of 1 to 7. And connection asked things like, how connected do you feel to AU? How much do you feel you're part of AU? Just questions like that. And then university perceptions was much more of a general attitude type scale. Questions here were things like, do you think AU is a good school? Do you think the classes you're taking are good and useful, and things of that nature? Not just the core class, but the classes you take overall. Do you think the curriculum is good? And finally, I always measure emotion. Ever since my advisor, my PhD, was angry that I didn't measure emotion in my dissertation. So now I measure emotion in everything. So here again, this was a 10-item scale that broke out into two factors. A couple of items didn't really load on anything. Number one, there was this happiness scale where it was like, again, these were semantic differentials where you could say happy, sad, excited, I think was one of them. Content, I think here was another emotion scale, or another thing that those broke out. And then I wasn't really sure what to name the other scale. I call it optimism, but it was all items about looking forward. Like, how did you feel about moving forward from your class? So there were things like, I'm proud of what I do at AU and I'm excited to take it into the workforce beyond this. I'm optimistic I'll be able to use this skill set and things like that. Now, I mentioned a couple of other secondary outcomes I looked at, and I have recruitment and retention up there because in that font, because this has been stamped on all of our foreheads, I think, for the last 2 years, and that we're interested in recruitment and retention. And interestingly, it broke out nicely. The scale broke out nicely because, again, recruitment and retention was kind of, these items were embedded in other scales that kind of came out. So the recruitment items, I actually thought they were kind of crappy items. After I wrote them and distributed them, I was having second thoughts about the items I put in there. But the questions were things like, would you go to an event to help recruit other students? Would you tell your friends to come to the university? So it's recruitment students would engage in, activities students would engage in to bring other students to AU. Would you recommend AU to seniors in high school? Things like that. And then retention were items like, and retention was only for students who were not graduating this year. So students who had the option to come back to AU or not. And it was 3 items. Do you plan on continuing your education at AU? Do you plan on finishing your degree at AU? And then reverse coded, do you think you'll transfer out of AU? So those 3 items all loaded together relatively well. As far as the results, now with the instructors, like I said, I didn't do any major inferential analyses yet. As I'll talk about later, there is a larger study that can come out of this that's going to involve very deep coding of the qualitative data. But I think one of the main takeaways here that I think is important to know is that a good percentage had no idea what the difference was between experiential and co-curricular activities. That has implications for the way that I collected data. So because when they were asked about experiential and co-curricular activities, separately, a lot of them conflated the two, and others would like for one class, I remember distinctly, somebody said they had 4 experiential learning activities and 4 co-curricular activities, but they were double counting. So like, as we mentioned, like one can fall into another category. So I got that data. I was like, oh crap. What are we going to do? So essentially what I did was I combined them into one category about like hands-on kinds of learning or non-traditional type learning. As I dig into the data more deeply and look at the qualitative descriptions of the kinds of activities people engage in, I'm going to code that data and use those as proxies for co-curricular and experiential activities. If there's enough data there, I also may go back and interview some of the instructors to get a bit more nuance into what they were talking about. But for now, it was collapsed into one category that it was kind of related to like hands-on kinds of learning. So with that, the numbers, and I'm not going to read all these numbers for you. The main thing to recognize is that every number that's not highlighted in black was significant. there were a lot of positive correlations all across this, which wasn't surprising with respect to satisfaction, stimulation, and educational value, because those were all presented kind of in two blocks of questions. And traditionally, when you do that, they correlate. But they also correlated to the other items that are more university related, like connection, experience with the university, happiness with the university, optimism, and recruitment. Excuse me. What we're mostly interested in, though, is that experiential learning or hands-on type learning in that first column. And remember, the data were collected separately. The number of experiential learning activities / co-curriculars was collected from instructors, and that data was related to students' responses in terms of satisfaction, stimulation, and so on. And I found there were positive correlations between the number of these kinds of activities students have and how satisfied, how stimulated, how much they thought the course was worth something, and their perceptions of a positive amount of workload, not more work, just an appropriate amount of work. However, experiential learning did not correlate to all those other university level outcomes or recruitment and retention, but it's more complicated than just simple correlations, because correlations can only tell us so much. As we see, because experiential learning, co-curricular activities are related to some of these class level outcomes or variables, and they correlate to some of the university level variables, there's something going on there. There's something that's missing in the data that connects the two. So I moved on to structural equation modeling to see kind of what's predicting what over the course, or what model matches the data most carefully. So instead of just using the correlation, say, yep, positive correlation, let's see what's going on. I developed a couple of path models to see exactly what leads to what, and found that the primary outcome from experiential learning activities is that students feel stimulated when they become excited about the coursework, when they engage in this kind of hands-on learning. And interestingly, the best fit to the model, that was the only direct effect from experiential learning / co-curriculars, was this stimulation. But beneficially, both for us as instructors who use these things, and beneficially for my analysis, because that would be pretty boring if that were the only case, stimulation mediated a couple more of these relationships. Stimulation was very strongly related to satisfaction with the course. So when we use these experiential learning activities and co-curriculars, we stimulate the students, and that in turn makes the students more satisfied with the course itself. But that wasn't all. I also found that stimulation also led to perceived educational value, perceived value of the course. And that satisfaction piece also led to perceived value of the course. So what this tells us is that these different activities that I looked into, they have an effect on education value, or perception of value for the education you're getting in that class, but it's all indirect. There's no direct effect. It's mediated by everything. This model fit the data best when I modeled everything together. So all the other university level variables, excuse me, they needed to be dropped from the model for it to fit the data the way it should. But that's not the end of the story. Down here at the bottom, we have overall effect sizes for the different outcomes and the way they are. So experiential learning opportunities has a standardized beta of 0.20 on stimulation, meaning for every one standard deviation change in the experiential learning metric, you get a 0.2 change in stimulation, and so on. Okay, but let's go back and look. Well, let me start here and say, okay, education value looks like it's the end of the road for this kind of path model. But remember, education value is strongly correlated with all these other variables as well. So why don't they show up in the path model, and why don't the data fit, or why don't the data for the path model fit when this variable hits, or when this variable is taken into account? Best I can make sense of is that, as I said, I'm missing a little something. But when we use education value as the predictor, and we want to predict all of these other kinds of variables, there is a correlation there, and there may be direct effects there, but there's something going on in between these variables that predicts all of these outcomes, that more research needs to be done to identify this mediator. The important thing to recognize, though, with respect to this model, is that we do get perceived value of education with increased number of experiential learning activities. So it's a lot of jumping around. There's a lot of indirect relationships here, but experiential learning does seem to have a positive effect on all these things we're interested in. I'll stop here real quick before I go on to the last part of the analysis, which it'll really talk about the need to do more research in this area. But any questions at all? Mm-hmm. Well, the recruitment wasn't the students being recruited. It was does their connection to AU motivate them to help recruit others? Yeah, so it's them. Would you tell your friends about this university? Would you recommend the university to others? Things like that. I call it a recruitment. It probably could probably call it, recommendation. What's that? Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, but I called it recruitment because, again, I've heard recruitment and retention every time I walk on campus. Yeah, yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Right. The- yep. Yep. So I tried to do that analysis. I tried to do kind of crosstabs of the course content, instructor. But I mean, there was 112 sections represented, but even with 112 sections, the cell numbers or the cell sizes are so low, you're not going to get a significant difference anyway. I hate when people do it at conferences, but essentially, it's the case here. You just need more data, and I'll show that actually there are implications for the lack of. It's not even a lack. 368 is pretty good, but 1,000 would answer a couple of questions that I have, some related to that, because I did see, again, anecdotally, looking at the spreadsheet, you can see what instructors put about their activities. And some of them were things like lab work. Like they were doing lab work. It was an experience where maybe it was like a biology class, where others it was, oh, I took students to a musical or something along those lines. So they're very different qualitatively. So the next step is going to be to code those in different ways, developing a coding scheme and look at those different ways. The problem with that, it's not a problem because I love collecting data, is then I need enough cases to fill each cell that I identify. You know what I mean? Yeah, with food, without food, free stuff, without free stuff. Yeah, 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 all those sorts of things. The oh, actually, let me see. There were questions in the chat too before I move on. Oh, gotcha. Okay. Okay. Did I speak at enough unnecessary length to understand the question that I was answering? The question there, we're going retroactively, was how can can we distinguish between the different kinds of unique elements of the different sections? So instructor, topic, whether they get free stuff. Can we determine whether or not that affects their perceptions of the course and the experience in the course? And the short answer is there's not enough data to make that determination yet. I think the largest cell was 11 students in one section answered, and for some it was as few as one. So it's difficult. The other implication of that is I've been talking about these relationships, and this may throw my entire analysis in the garbage, but I've been talking about these relationships as if the relationship between the outcomes and the number of experiences is linear. So I was like, maybe I should do a curve estimation to see that, make sure this is linear. So, for example, and I'm only using one for the purpose to illustrate, but this is the satisfaction outcome versus experiential learning opportunities. Um, the linear model fit well. It fit it was a significant model. Like it says, okay, it's a linear path that go this way. The problem is it also said that the curvilinear path also fit the data relatively well. The only way to determine which is more close a fit, because they were both very close fits to the data, is to gather more data and get more data points to fill out this, to flesh this out. You look skeptical. Yeah. The the yeah, yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. But we had there was the positive slope of the one. I want to get this has to do with getting rid of some of the, or not getting rid of, but filtering the data in a way that the courses where there are zero, they're filtered out. But you see, as you get more, like one, there's a decently even distribution. Two, same thing. It's when you get up to like three, four, five, you really start to see more of a linear relationship. There were one or two sections, and that's what makes this curvilinear path or curvilinear relationship possible, where there was 13. They identified 13. I had to drop the case, but there was one where there were 15 experiential learning activities. So essentially, I need to be able to gather more data to say whether it's one or the other. The relationship appears to be positive, but if it's curvilinear, it does seem to like there's diminishing returns when you get to a certain point. But I'm treating this as if it's linear, because everything that I learned from my master's level methods class was, if they both fit the data, go simpler so you can explain what you're explaining. So I treat it as linear, but that does mean that there is more data to collect here to determine the nature of the relationship. Mm-hmm. Very true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. Or negative. Like it means maybe there may be some students out there they have to do 15 different. I don't know. I remember when I remember when I did when I was a when I was a undergrad, I was a business major. I don't remember why, and I was an art history minor, and I remember why, because I got bad grades for a while, and I'd explained to my parents what I was going to be in college for an extra year. So I picked up an art history minor, and as part of the art history minor, one of my classes was we had to travel to the Princeton Art Museum every week. So they're 15, and for 6 weeks, it's pretty cool. Like you get to 10, 11, 12, 13 weeks, it's like, okay, that'll do. So again, I mean, I hate the excuse or the response, more data, but more data would help here, and more variable data too, different kinds of classes where there are multiple kinds of experiential learning activities and co-curriculars. So from this data, I can generally extrapolate that there is an effect of these activities on course outcomes, both at the university level and at the individual section level. And generally speaking, it seems like more hands-on learning activities is better, but the slope of that linear relationship, it's not crazy. So it doesn't seem to be, a one-to-one, but it does seem like there's a positive relationship there. As far as what I want to do next, and I've talked about some of this already. Number one, code all the experiential learning activities that were and co-curriculars that were sent my way by the helpful instructors, create variables, and then try to get some kind of understanding out of how some of these different things might moderate the relationships. As I mentioned before, the curve estimation will help, and determine the effect of course subject, which I'm very interested in. Again, I can only say anecdotally, but looking through the comments from the instructors, and this sometimes is only just a line. For example, in biology, I think that the effect of the experiential hands-on learning it was less impactful than in other kinds of sections, which you would think. So I will stop there. I think we have 20 minutes for questions if we want to talk about any of these things a bit further. But this has been an enlightening experience. Not least of which, because again, with Brad's help, being able to identify all the different classes across the core and identify the way that different teachers approach these kinds of activities, it's actually given me some ideas for my classes as well. So I'll stop there. If anybody wants to discuss any of this any further, I'll take any questions, comments, or anything like that. Oh, well, my course was in the fall and I did the analysis just a couple months ago. So I'm going to, well, number one, I'm going to incorporate more into my course. Right now, I think six. We did six last time. Originally, it was just two. We did Comet Ping Pong and we had a guest speaker come in from Department of State. And then the second time I taught it, I had Comet Ping Pong, Department of State, and then a former student of mine who works at a political communication advisory firm came in and gave a talk, and she was kind enough to give the students advice on if they want to get involved in that kind of work. And this past semester, Comet Ping Pong, the two speakers, went to the Capitol, which was a big hit because if anybody does anything in government, online or in person, the personnel at the Capitol, although I don't know anymore, this was before the election, um, the personnel at the Capitol were so helpful. They did a like a mock Congress voting thing. It was very, very cool. The students loved it. But I think some of the things that I really want to incorporate more into this are kind of more downtown DC stuff. Like they like the guest speakers and they like kind of the ways that these speakers can help guide them as they go from for my students, freshmen on to the rest of their career at AU. But for a lot of my students, they're from the mid Atlantic, but not from DC. So I think what I'd like to do is take some of the things that I'm talking about and do not just a pizza party, but take them to the places where January 6th insurrectionists are important to them. Maybe take the walk from the ellipse to the Capitol building to show them this is the path that some of these people walk. Those are the windows they broke. Again, this is all for my course specifically. I mean, there's so much you can do with DC. But from what I've seen, again, I can only say anecdotally what I saw based on the responses given by instructors. Those kinds of active activities were the ones the students really responded positively to, which I think I want to incorporate. I also, if I can say one more thing on this too, and I know everybody's tired of hearing about it, but I think these kinds of activities are going to become more important, not just kind of as a bonus for students, but as instructors move away from, and I'm getting the impression that some instructors are moving away from things like papers for assignments because of generative AI and how, I mean, there's just an article, I think, in the Atlantic about how one of them did an in-depth look to see that computers are writing papers that are being used, that are being graded by other computers because instructors use AI to help grade. So I'm going to move a bit away from things like response papers for my assignments and move more on things like reflections that are specific to those activities that ChatGPT couldn't replicate. But they'd have to put a little bit more work into it. You know, yeah, they have to do a little work for the prompt. If they're not going to do my assignment, I'll teach them to work AI properly. So, oh, okay. Okay, so let me repeat that so people can hear me too. Forgive me if I missed this, but did you ask students how well they thought extracurricular activities related to course content? Not directly, but there were some of the one of the questions related to education value and workload related to that. But in terms of the match between the course content itself and the extracurricular activity, no, I didn't ask anything specific to that. Although that would be good to ask because I would imagine a mismatch, they would probably reduce their impression of what it is. But again, who knows? Because maybe students who are doing, reading about disinformation, conspiracy theories every week would be jazzed to go, go downtown to an art museum or something for the purposes of getting to know their classmates. I just don't know because I didn't ask, and to get some significant differences, we need much larger numbers in the cells. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is a distinction that I was thinking of while I was doing the analysis too. And another one of those moderator analyses is in like a core 100 course, you probably have a lot more leeway to do different kinds of cool, fun co-curricular activities than you would in a 400 level course, which is much more intensive. So that would be another, I think, moderator analysis to look into and gather survey data from instructors because you're right, you couldn't do a 400 level class and do 10 co-curricular, 10 experiential activities if you had that much content to get through. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've done with my courses. Like in my course, when I first started teaching, like I said, we only had two extracurricular activities, but I have like an entire unit on cults, and that would take oftentimes 2 or 3 blocks because I would go through examples of cults, kind of the socialization that goes into cults, things like that. I found I could kind of boil that down into one section, but it take or one class session, but it takes a little bit of creativity because I always forget what it's called. But to do that, I had to do like it's called the flipped classroom, where you kind of instead of lecturing to them, the class is more about discussion. They get to go into the content more in depth. That allowed me to, I don't want to say skip, but emphasize the things that were of greater interest to them in the core or in the class session rather than go through things that get it kind of here and there. So it does take a little bit of creativity to do that. But I think you're right in that those kind of upper level courses might be more difficult, but it can be done, I think. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was one instructor, again, I think it was bio again. It was either bio or chem, where they responded to my survey, but it was one of those things where I don't think they would really they don't recognize that connection yet. I'd like to make that case, but I remember very distinctly when they answered the survey, it was 0, 0. I don't have time for that. That was a response. I'm like, all right, I'll code that as not relevant. But yeah, I think you're right. I do think that there is value in this for especially I'm a bit biased because I have freshmen and I have the leeway to take the freshmen on these different activities. And number two, I almost feel responsibility for helping the freshmen kind of assimilate to AU, and this helps them do that. I actually see that as part of my responsibility as a teacher of this course, which is interesting because whenever generally when you teach, you're like, okay, I teach the course content and that's it. But now with the way that the kind of the core is structured and some of, let's say, social deficiencies that some of the students have, I actually see it as a scholastic service to them to help them learn to socialize because they will do better as they learn to do some of these things more socially. But yeah, finding that balance at the different levels, I think, is critical. Oh, interesting. I mean, I hadn't considered that. But I don't know how students taking online courses would respond to that. Well, it depends, I guess, the nature of how they came to take that online course. The question is, Sorry, I'm going to repeat it again because yeah. Any consideration of experiential learning in an online course. In my experience, there are two kinds of online learners. Number one, students who are taking online classes. Well, three students who are taking online classes to fulfill a requirement. Students who are taking online classes because they have no other kind of ability to do it. They would rather take it in person, but they have no other way to do it. And students who just want to sit at home and enjoy being alone, which would kind of fly in the face of these kind of experiential learning activities. So I guess the short answer there, and I'm gonna embrace is I don't know. I don't know how they would actually they would pan out depending on the kinds of learners you have. Um, yeah, Rachel has a good comment in the chat. It says gallery walks for online museums. Yeah, I think that I mean it's restricted by the technology, and there's issues related to equity and access and things like that. But I mean, as things like AI become more accessible, and not AI, I'm sorry, um, VR, as that becomes more, I mean, it's not accessible now, but it has come down in price. As it becomes more accessible to students, that could be another option as well to engage in some of these activities. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. The question was, what about the cases? Would there be an effect of being with the instructor during the experience or kind of doing it on your own? And I think we'd probably see again, there are probably so many interaction effects here. So like we mentioned earlier, the instructor effect. I imagine students would much prefer to do these on their own if they don't like their instructor, and they prefer to do it with their instructor if they do like them. And I mean, God help me if there's three-way interactions and four-way interactions, but they probably exist too. But these are all things, yeah, that more data would help to figure out. I think what I'm going to do instead of just saying I need more data, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to resubmit this IRB every year and try to collect data from the core each year and build out like a larger data set, more a more nuanced data set to see how students feel about it. Um, it's probably too late now. Well, maybe not. It would also be cool to do almost like a panel study to see how students change over time under a freshman over the course of their career as well. I do have, I mean, I do have their AUIDs, but no, yeah, I have their AUIDs. So I had to sign, I had to link it to their course. So I could do that presumably to see how they go over time as well. Rachel says in the chat, engaging in a similar local organization and centering a class discussion and presentation around the experience. Rachel has good ideas. Oh, that's inside ball, Rachel. All right, all right.
Sorry, I had to.
Any other questions at all? All right, we'll wrap up. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. These were code. I actually did code. These were individual instances of doing something. So if it was 10 individual experiences that were part of one project, that would count as 10. Yeah. Just because of the way I wanted to operationalize the activity rather than the product. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Oh, I keep stop. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. Let me see if I have the data here. Let me see if I can pull it up and give you some examples. Oh, I don't have it. Yeah, I don't have the data on me right now, but if I can email it to you if you want to see the list, yeah. I can email the list. I can email you. I wanted to make a list of the number, like the sections or the subjects that were most heavily represented. Another a bias in the data is that the courses where they were kind of 100 level courses where there's tons and tons of sections were heavily represented. So bio 110, I think there were 12 sections of it, I think, in the data. So I'm sure they would, yeah. 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 Proprietary. Actually, AU probably owns it because it's a CTRL product. So oh yeah. Yeah. Not bad for students. And without there was no incentive provided. It was nope. There were actually some students, to their credit too, undergrads. I think they were juniors and seniors who were in research classes, but they're using the right language. Like, can you send me the aggregated data when you get it? I'm like, I could send you the aggregated data. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it, everybody.